It's the Pichy and Palscast with your host Pichy and my friend Matt who hates anime. Couple of points of order before we get into tonight's festivities. First of all, my YouTube channel, which as you've probably noticed is where I'm hosting these things until I have enough income again to just host a SoundCloud account, I have had a copyright strike, which has struck the Happy Time Murders episode. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what YouTube does, there are companies which have bots, and the bots go around and they search for terms which the companies have been hired to search for, and they just send copyright takedowns to anything which contains this term. In this case, I would assume, given the timing of that episode, that it was probably explicitly searching for the Happy Time Murders and just spat out a takedown. There's lots of different forms of copyright strike that you can do. Like, you can have ones where you say, this video is just demonetized, so any revenue gained from the clicks instead goes to the person who sent the strike. There's ones which will restrict it based on regions, saying, hey, I own the copyright for this region, etc. And some mobs will just say, no, just remove it immediately. And that is what happened to mine. Now, I did use some copyrighted audio at the start. There was the jingle to the start of the Attract Mode 2 Skullgirls. The bot was not a representative of Lab Zero Games, or Autumn Games, or Konami, or... did I say Lab Zero? Or the actual composers that worked on Skullgirls, so I'm pretty sure that it was just a bot seeing the words Happy Time Murders and cutting out the content. So what happens now is I've sent a counterclaim, and in anywhere from next week to 6 months' time, that will get processed and the video will be restored and the strike removed. So I probably won't re-upload the episode, or just let it appear. It'll be the Phantom Mysterious episode. And when I'm feeling particularly creative or really want to actually up the quality of the episodes, I usually fiddle around with things like putting in some music and stuff. Won't be doing that for a while, just to be safe. Just remain completely blameless by having audio directly from us, and just a plain text background rather than a screen cap from anything we're using, just to be completely safe.
I'm shocked to hear this. I can't believe this is the first I've heard of it. Of all the ones to strike, it decided to hit the Happy Time Murders video.
Well, the only other time I had a copyright strike was footage of the hit game Death Cargo, which was actually a takedown notice from Necrostorm because they didn't want any footage of how terrible the game is getting out.
Because we're thinking that this was a bot, right? This is just it was like a blanket search term for...
Yep, it's just a bot.
Yeah, that's super strange to me, as in, why they would have decided, right, we need to get rid of all Happy Time Murder content from YouTube.
No, it's just they were commissioned to do it, and so they punched that data in, and off it goes.
Oh, yeah, I understand that. I was wondering why they'd be commissioned to do such a thing like that.
Because big businesses are evil and should be removed.
Fair enough. That's really sad, though.
Also, kill copyright. But of course, I can't just say kill copyright because, reform of copyright needs to also come with broader economic reforms. Otherwise, you'll lead to a situation where it will benefit people who have the greater production capabilities in order to just reproduce stolen content then, rather than having a situation where people are able to make livings and enjoy living life without necessarily having to own their IP, because that is not their sole source of bread and butter. But enough about left-wing politics. Let's get into a movie where I hate the military complex.
Well, we should. I mean, I guess if the video isn't available, the TLDR, the short version is it's a shit movie, and you should not watch it. Even if you are curious, just don't watch it.
Yeah, don't bother. Watch Muppets Most Wanted. It's better than that. You look like you want to say something while I was just taking a bit of a water there.
Oh, no, sorry. No, that was it. I just wanted, before we got into it, I just thought we should might as well at least say the opinion on the movie, just in case people were like, I wonder what, it's been taken down. I wonder what they thought.
Oh, and the secret. No. I'm probably going to cut it just so we have the secret lost episode. It'll be like Strong Bad Email 22.
But on the off chance that, a lot of people, I don't want to have to think about the Happy Time Murder. So the idea of, anyone hounding us to no, tell us what happened.
What do you think of the Happy Time Murders? Oh, I'll tell you what I think of the Happy Time Murders. But
at the very, very least, we have We do talk about it, I guess, a little bit in the listicle video, and people will see that it is at the end, at the bottom of the list. So that should at least tell them all they need to know.
Yeah, that's a bit of a warning right there. Let me just check this because I was peeking that mic a bit. Words. Okay, that should be good now, right there. So what we're doing for the next few months is looking back at the entirety of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This series, depending on what time I have available to me over the course, may become quite intricate. But starting off, I just wanted to look at how these first two movies in this franchise feel, and talk a bit about our relationship with comic books at the time that these came out. So for me, I really read Big Two in my mid-teens. So this was like 04-ish through to about 08, where Secret Invasion happened, and that was absolutely me having my fill of blockbuster crossover Crisis events. One of the first comic series I'd read, based on a recommendation, was actually Crisis on Infinite Earths, the DC Comics mid-80s, the definitive original. I mean, like, there's things like Secret Wars before that by Marvel, but, like, Crisis on Infinite Earths is the real textbook trendsetter with an incredibly bad script. It's just, like, DC Comics Bronze Age writing is awful. It's like, you'll get a panel where a person is saying, a person looks sad, and they'll have a text bubble saying, I feel sad, and the narrator will say, she feels sad! And it's all like that, except for, like, the Alan Moore written stuff, where it's like, oh, hey, there's actual direction here. And so, like, I was reading, trying to dig up as much history as I could, because that was around the time that I started having better access to resources through the internet and through being able to meet people who had better travel, being a person who lived in Whoop Whoop. And so around the time that the cinematic universe started was around the time that I was really, really tired of Marvel and DC's content. So Iron Man was this movie I went to see, and it's, oh yeah, I know Iron Man, he's that Z-list guy no one cares about. I went, hey, that was pretty fun. And it's, I guess I'll see more of these, because I'm glad that people are at least enjoying comics. Of course, had that sense of, well, now that Marvel's got a movie that seems to be doing quite well and is quite popular, maybe they'll, like, launch a really good popular Iron Man book. But Marvel Comics is a very different institution to Marvel Pictures. And so, which I should actually talk about that briefly. I'll need to look up a name, though, which I'll look up while Matt is telling his story. So...
fortunately, it's not much of a story, because I'm one of those people that are kind of the newbies. I'm not sure if there's a name for them, but just like I'm someone who was only really got into comics from the MCU, to be totally honest. I mean, I'd seen Batman, and I understood. I'd seen like a few Superman movies and a few Batman films, like what's his name? Nightmare Before Christmas, even though it wasn't really him. Either way, I'd seen a few like of the early Batman and Superman films, and other than that, I hadn't had much exposure to comic book superheroes. For some reason, as a child, I always thought they were kind of dumb. It just wasn't something that I kind of just never really thought about it too much. And so I was really surprised when suddenly this Iron Man movie came out. I had no idea who Iron Man was, and suddenly everyone was just like, in my friendship bubble, was suddenly like, we have to go see this comic book film. And I was like, I had no idea who it was. So I came into this entire MCU very, very fresh, I would say.
Cool. And yeah, like, you getting into comics was a process that you went through in the time that I've known you, and I met you around late 09-ish?
Yeah, I wasn't sure whether to talk about, I guess, yeah, I wasn't sure if we were talking about, like, history of comics before we went to the MCU, or, like, just general history of comics.
I think establishing where we stand with comics from that point through to now.
Oh, yeah.
Works.
Yeah, totally. From there, I kind of took, like, I would call it a deep dive. I was reading comics a lot, a little bit into watching a few of these MCUs, I think especially around Avengers time, the Avengers movie. I had started really reading, not just old comics, but also I was like looking at the schedules like week to week.
Following the trades.
Yeah, following the trades, that's what you would say. And I kind of had like what I would say almost like a crash course in like what happens to people who read comics. Maybe not everyone. This is a generalization.
But people who like have a brain and don't just become this consumption machine who then gets built into this tribal line of, now this is a part of my identity that I must love Marvel or DC and read it forever.
So yeah, there was maybe about, I think maybe a year of just reading comics like all the time, every week, all the time. And I would have at that point said that I've been pretty knowledgeable of what was going on in the current like Marvel Comics universe. And then after a while, I started to see I kind of just started having issues with how they kind of structured their stories. And over time...
What structure?
I generally I really disliked the way they would constantly be changing writers and creatives in their stories, and how you would never be able to get like a full run before a big crossover event happens that would just kind of like turn everything over, and every like little character you were following, like the story and arc they were on, would just get completely disrupted. And I just was starting to get just very annoyed with that.
And then once the crossovers finally happened, they then do a complete relaunch of all the books, when now they're back to issue 1, and the artist has switched, though the writer might be sticking around for 2 more issues, trying to wrap up a story arc, but then actually they've been switched to a different book.
It's such a mess, and it doesn't help. It doesn't help that these stories of the crossovers themselves tended to be the weakest that I'd ever read, and just in terms of like general
you didn't like
storytelling.
Siege? That there's a big fight in Asgard, and everyone's here to fight the fight.
Yeah, like it is interesting to me that even though all Marvel seemed to care about after a while was the crossovers, that the crossovers were the worst written. That seems to me very
but they cost
interesting.
$8 US. They've got to be good. $8 for 20 pages. That's like 16, 17 Australian dollars.
I think the only thing that stood out with the crossovers is they always seem to get the good artists, and so they kind of trick you for a little while, where it's like, wow, this art is amazing. And then slowly every time you're like, oh damn, I wish these artists were on the good books instead of being like drawn to the big crossover events, which were always just very disappointing.
Yeah, this is basically what happens to anyone trying to read them, because both Marvel and DC are very much focused on short-term gains and really dumb cargo cult mentalities. They're also kind of pushed into it by the fact that the publishing of comics, the only printer is Diamond Publishing, who have gotten a monopoly on the industry over the last 20 years. If you're not familiar with the business side of comics, and I feel like this is always a good time to bring this up, the only sales metrics that Marvel and DC care about are the direct market, they call it, which is the pre-ordered units, which are then shipped out to the comic book stores. So comic book stores have to see what is coming out. They have to make a predictive purchase of how much they think is going to sell by buying X amount, and then hope that those will actually sell. So any unsold books which sit in the comic book store, those are entirely the comic book store's loss, because usually the distributors won't take it back. So if you want to actually support the comic book industry for the big two, you don't go to the store and buy the comic. You go to the store and you pre-order a comic that's coming out in 3 months' time, which you maybe know the title, the artist, and the writer of. But you probably won't know all 3 of those things in 3 months early. That's what you have to do. And if that sounds really, really backwards and stupid and an awful way to make money, this is why Marvel Comics don't make that much money. So the other thing I got to mention before we get into discussing Iron Man and the Incredible Hulk, the first 2 Marvel Cinematic Universe films, is a fellow called Ronald Owen Perelman, who became a Marvel executive in about 1995, I think, or 96. He is what is best described as a vulture capitalist. What he did was he ascended the ranks of Marvel, while also having investments in other things. He racked up a very large pile of bad debt, which he then offset into his position in Marvel, which helped at a time where this was around the time that comic books were having this really big focus on the speculators market, have these big issue 1 launches where you've got multiple edition, fancy hologram and alternate covers. Like, this is when there's that X-Men relaunch a couple years earlier, X-Men Volume 1, which sold like 5 million copies, the best-selling individual comic book of all time. because they were just built around just, you gotta buy this issue 1, and in 30, 40 years' time, it'll be worth a fortune. So you gotta have it, and you gotta have several, so you can then keep them and make money off them eventually. Don't read them, though. And Ron Perelman, so at the time where that's been building up through the 90s, that's just about to crash at the same time that Perelman offsets a huge amount of debt onto Marvel Comics. So suddenly, there's this huge crash where just everyone stops buying comics because they've realized that the Emperor's got no clothes on the speculators market. At the same time that the debtors come in trying to collect on Ron Perelman's stuff. And so Marvel Comics suddenly goes bankrupt because it's got all this billionaire's debt, which isn't Marvel's debt, at the same time that their revenue streams are drying up. And so in order to compensate for this and resolve this bankruptcy and have the payouts to the CEO, which is Ronald Owen Perelman, Marvel has to sell off all of its movie rights. And this is why Marvel Comics rights just are owned by every other studio in Hollywood at this point, because it's just a smorgasbord. You can just buy the ones that you want and maybe let other people get the other ones you don't particularly care about. Like, Fox can have Fantastic Four. They haven't been relevant since the 70s, etc. And all that money basically goes into Perelman's pocket and he runs off laughing. And that is why then, as we get to 2005, 2006-ish, when pre-production begins on this idea to really launch this Marvel cinema unit as a separate entity from Marvel Comics with different management, with people in the actual film industry running it, so it's not going to be ham-fistedly stupid. And they've got basically no characters to work with to begin with. Because all the big ones, Spider-Man's just had this big run produced by Sony with Sam Raimi at the helm. You've had the X-Men ones from Fox. They're trying their hands at a Fantastic Four, etc., etc., etc. You know the drill. It's all those movies from that period, Blade. And so it's like, well, what do we do? I guess we'll try Iron Man. And so out comes this movie, directed by Jon Favreau, who is, of course, directing The Lion King 2019, the current generation equivalent of the Psycho remake, where it's going to be shot for shot and worse in every single shot. So that's what Favreau's doing at the moment, but yes, he comes on board and directs Iron Man. And it's a pretty fun movie. Let's talk about Iron Man.
Yeah, I was pretty happy to watch this again. It had been a while. I'm not sure if I've even seen it since seeing it in the cinemas.
Yeah, I hadn't seen this since the cinema in 08.
Yeah, and I was unsure whether it would hold up as well as I remembered it. And actually, I think it was probably better than I remembered it, to be totally honest. I understood that there was a weakened third act. I understood that there was a little rough. There was some rough things around the edges, but I think ultimately it tells a good story about one particular character who goes through a pretty clear, defined arc. That is, he's likable, he's in some way relatable, even though he's quite a rich guy. In the end, it's just a nice, neat little movie that just tells a little story of one particular character going through an interesting arc. And I think that's just the perfect way to have started this MCU.
Yeah. The way that this starts things off is very good. This is 2008. This is the year of Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight, where there is this expectation, where we've had this period where the X-Men movies around the 2000s had a certain combination of ideology and kitsch, but then by X-Men 3 The Last Stand, they'd burnt most of their credibility. It turns out Bryan Singer is a terrible person to work with. At the same and like all the good bits of X-Men 1 and 2 are kind of flukes and kind of product of him having people under his wing like Michael Dougherty by that point. I'm never going to be very nice to Bryan Singer because as far as not only is his track record like X-Men 1 and Days of Future Past as his fun movies, but like from a logistical production standpoint, he is a man who just does not show up to set half the time. He wastes money. He drives everyone up the wall. He treats everyone horribly. He's not a cool bloke, and it's surprising he still gets work in the industry. But anyway, so we've got that, and we've got the really, really kitsch stuff, like the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. We talked about Spider-Man 3, of course, last year. And really, Spider-Man 2 is probably, along with Tim Burton's Batman 1989, the best superhero movies up to this point. But then Iron Man comes along, and where do I want to start talking about this movie? I think... Oh yeah, I'm talking about easing people into a world of superheroes again. And the way it does this is by taking a visual and a cultural and a visual landscape and a cultural setting of building on post 9/11 movies, where I feel this movie in some ways builds on what things like Spielberg's War of the Worlds does, even, where it's very firmly set in this world where people are accustomed to this forever war in the Middle East. And it's there that conflicts first arrive, where we know that we're stuck in this eternal quagmire and we need something to change. And so it's from there that this figure emerges who then starts making a difference. And that allows us to ease from going through these visuals and this setting that we're used to of people in the desert with guns, moving into this more strange, colorful thing starting to come to life. And it works really, really well. It really starts to pull you in. This movie, you can start to see the glimpses of the sort of signature comedy, which has really become, because later Marvel Cinematic Universe movies are very much action comedies. But Iron Man 1 is barely even an action movie. It really does feel like a superhero movie, in that it's just the story of this person coming into being and learning things about themselves and developing an ethos, which is then going to carry them going forward.
Yeah, it definitely has like a classic kind of style to it, in terms of like you have this very narcissistic main character who is very flawed. He's almost like a Disney level of flawed, which is funny because it's a Disney film. But like,
it's not yet a Disney movie.
Oh yeah, that's true. But it has he has a lot of earmarks to me of like that classic.
Oh yeah, like a Renaissance Disney, where the script writing practices of the Renaissance Disney films, that's the 90s Disney movies, is that the hero's journey is one of going from a hero stating what they want to discovering what they need. And that's absolutely Tony Stark in this film.
Yeah, like he starts off as this like narcissistic just philandering asshole.
War profiteer.
Yeah, war profiteer. He's actually genuinely a villain. Like he lives very wealthily off like the suffering of others, and he doesn't care at all. And he has no real purpose in life other than that. He's just kind of a vulture or something. And then we see him have this big moment in his life, this call to action, and he has a lot of lines actually during the film where he does sound like almost, I was going to say Batman-like, but really just like any like real superhero who has like a very strong motivation to either to justice or like whatever like particular thing they believe in, and they're almost becoming that. How to put
the
this?
Embodiment of that ideology.
Yeah, like he has like some conversations with Pepper Potts where he's just like, this is what I have to do now. Like there's not even a conversation about it. He has decided this is now his path, and no one is going to like knock him out of it.
Yeah, there's this moment which has very interesting framing, where in one of his conversations with Gwyneth Paltrow, boy is it weird to be seeing Gwyneth Paltrow. Like, that's a case where the actor's ethos has impacted my viewing, because it's like Pepper Potts is fun to watch, but the whole time I'm thinking, when is she going to talk about the evils of vaccination? But there is a conversation he's having with Pepper Potts where he overtly states that the signings don't matter, the base charity doesn't matter anymore, only the mission matters.
That's definitely the one I was mostly thinking of. Like, and that was like it's a very Batman kind of speech. Just like, now I have to do this.
Yeah. And there's a very complicated framing there where it's simultaneously you can understand that Tony's really becoming dedicated to his new cause. Yet at the same time, it's still framed as this is a man who's swerved way too hard and he's going to be damaging pretty much every facet of his life with the relentless pursuit that he's now developed towards this, which is, of course, something that's built on over the course of the MCU.
Yeah, that's one of the things that is probably really interesting to watch with this film, just knowing the journey that this guy goes on. And
yeah, the seeds are being planted right from the get-go.
This idea of like, and I think what really helps make him an interesting character is that even though he's made this hard swerve from war profiteer asshole man to like mostly a noble hero trying to make the world a better place, but
He's a billionaire, so he's still a villain.
Yeah, there's like still a lot of rough edges to him, and like you can tell that he doesn't really. I don't think he actually understands exactly how to make the world a better place. He's just kind of flailing a little bit through a lot of this film. He's just like, he's seen the damage, at least a little bit of the damage that he's done to the world, and he is just so desperate to fix it, to do something so quickly, to make the guilt that he has go away. And you'll see that in this film, and you'll see that in a lot of the actions that he does. Let's say like making Ultron, or the fact that he feels this ever-present need to be the guy who saves the world.
Yeah, almost every civil issue in the MCU from this point stems from Tony Stark's guilt as well as his ego. There's belief that there are things that are wrong that need to be fixed, that are systemic issues, but also this firm belief that one man must make that difference, and he is the man to do that.
And that's what makes him so interesting. The fact that he's on this redemptive path, but it's not a straight line. It's
long and complicated.
Yeah, and he can be an asshole on it, in some ways, despite the fact that he has such a noble goal.
Yeah, and it says a lot that he's had the most dedicated films towards him at this point. I mean, technically Captain America's also had 3 now. Civil War's a weird one, where whenever I think about it, I don't think of it as the Captain America 3. I think of it as almost Avengers 2.5 or Avengers 3.
Yeah, there's not, of all the films that are technically dedicated, like Captain America or Iron Man, Ant-Man, it's the one that is the most just like, this is just another Marvel movie, really.
Yeah, you could have called it anything. Marvel 8, or whatever number it was at that point. Marvel 9?
I wouldn't be able to remember, which is the point, I guess. There's so many of these things.
Yes. Well, I mean, as it is, we're still in 2008 with 2 films. You know what film I was thinking about a lot as we watched this? Transformers by Michael Bay, the 2007 film. Because that film has undeniably got an influence on how this film is shot and the aesthetic. Both of these films that we watch have very much a Transformers influence in how they shoot and frame the military, where even when the military are overtly villainous, they're still framed in a way that makes them look cool and powerful, and not in a way that, like, say, Lenin Rosenstoff would do it. It's very much the Michael Bay style, where they're shot like that advertisement. There's 2 shots in particular in Iron Man which really, really scream Transformers to me. One is as Tony is walking onto his Learjet near the start of the film, and the second is in a hangar, where he pops up to have a chat with what's-his-face in the military, and there's a bunch of cadets and stuff.
Rhodey.
Yeah, Rhodey. So, that first one, where he's walking on the Learjet, it's this low-angle shot with a moving camera on a dolly, while you have naturalized lighting with a clear blue sky, yet it's also still early morning, so you have this incredible orange glow over everything. And it can only achieve the right sort of lighting and shot for this one cut of this low-angle shot of Tony walking up the stairs. When they switch to a wide shot, an establishing shot, and an overhead shot, none of those have that same look. And I'm bringing this up because I think I've said it before that Michael Bay is absolutely a cinematic genius who uses his power for pure evil. And this is a really good example because the cinematographer could only work out how to do a Michael Bay-style shot twice in the entire film. And Michael Bay can do it for every single shot. He makes them all look that good. And most people just can't do it. It's too hard. There's something sublime and spiritual in Michael Bay's villainy that allows him to continually and consistently land those moments of lighting.
That's kind of depressing, the idea of like this talent in the hands of an evil person, I guess. I would say that with the visuals, you can tell that because it is the first one, they haven't quite nailed in or dialed in the specific look they want for all these movies now.
That's kind of an interesting one because this is a pre-color grading period still. It's Avengers 1, I think, is the last film that was shot on film. I think it's whatever comes after that, Ant-Man?
Avengers 1?
Yeah.
After Avengers 1 would be Iron Man 3, and then Thor 2, and then
Yeah,
into
one of
phase
one
2.
of those is when they switch to the digital cameras that they use. So it's just like the way that you light things is extremely important for how your film's going to look. And while lighting is obviously still very important, color grading also has a further impact on things. And the color grading that most of the Marvel movies use later on is also this very flat gray, very stock color grading a lot of the time, which makes things look more washed out than they should. And it's really the James Gunn and Taika Waititi films where they really start to play around with that color grading more. So the reds and the greens in Thor Ragnarok really pop out a lot stronger, and the blues and the purples in Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah, and I would say in specific to this film, it actually does look really good at times. Like,
Well, the practical effects in this film are very good. There's a lot of petrol being ignited, and I am all for petrol explosions. They really look and feel so much more real because you're shooting an actual tangible thing that's happening.
yeah, and especially because we're going to be talking about another film after this that did not look good visually for 90% of it, at least. It definitely stands in contrast. Like, just like a lot of the scenes, like the scene when Tony builds his first suit of armor in the cave out of a box of scraps. It just looks really, really good. Like, just watching as he like gets hit by things and is knocking people around. Like, it's just, you can tell that something is actually there, which I think really, really helps.
Yeah, he's working with metal. He's melting things and he's banging things, throwing people into rocks, knocking over dust, setting off possibly actual flamethrowers. The thing that I always was really thinking of when we got through that was this moment that we brought up a bit while watching, which is when Tony Stark has that moment of, okay, I've really got to finish building this Iron Man suit because I've been threatened. And it hard cuts to him banging on metal with a hammer. And you're making the comment of, hey, it's kind of funny that Tony Stark, who's this businessman and this science genius, he's a nerd. And now he's being given this big masculine power moment, and that speaks a lot to certain expectations of masculinity that are being further projected by these films, that you must be a man of physical action and strength. Though, I don't think you've seen this. I'm going to dig up something. This won't really come up in the audio at all. I just want to show you Iron Man Fox opening. This should be the one. I hope this is the one. Whoa. This is not the one I was thinking of. Let's get the cartoon I'm opening. This is going to be cut a bit. I am looking for... Oh, we are not talking about the Iron Man anime. There's some very poor decisions there. Those are all incredibly bad, all those. There's the one with... Vampire Hunter.
I didn't even know there was a Iron Man cartoon.
There have been several. And there's one which I'm trying to find. Let's see if this is the one. Yeah, here we are.
Oh my god.
Is this the one?
Oh,
yes, here we are.
Yeah.
So this is probably not picking up particularly well in the backing audio. But what we have is this voice saying, I am Iron Man. As you see this huge, chiseled, muscular man hammering with a hammer to construct his Iron Man suit as a guitar solo swirls and shreds. And he constructs his Iron Man suit. And that's something which I feel like is being evoked in that moment at the same time as like this general projection of big, strong, masculine man of action, which is kind of boring to me.
Yeah, but it is interesting though to me, like, because, you know, like, we've been built up upon, or grown up with, like, the idea of the big, strong action hero, your Arnold Schwarzeneggers, your Sylvester Stallones, the idea that...
Yeah, so you have to mold Tony Stark into that.
Yeah, and it's also...
Otherwise he won't be accepted.
And I think as we like, you know, as we get further and further into like as we grow technologically wise, more and more the idea of physical strength as being something that like helps us even in fighting, like even in the most like where you would consider physical strength to be the most important, like in an actual direct combat. Nowadays it's like we have guns, we have missiles, and now we have in this superhero movie we have this guy literally making power for him. Like he could be a tiny person who has like no muscles whatsoever. He gets into a suit. It's meaningless how muscly he is or how manly he is, but we still need it. Like we still need that. And I don't know. It's just an interesting observation to me.
Yeah, it leans into expectations as well as certain expectations of gays that like we must project this also masculinity, otherwise he won't be accepted as being a true man, and that's false. But at the same time, that also plays into the various toxic aspects of Tony Stark's personality that pervade throughout this film and will continue to plague him throughout every film after this one.
Yeah, it's just because I first noticed this in Iron Man 2, and I was interested to see that, when I'm going back to this for the first time in a long time, it was there in Iron Man 1 as well. So yeah.
The other thing is, there's these brief moments of brand shots that I was talking about, and I'm just bringing this up. We had another friend here, and I really wanted to highlight that there were some very good teaching moments as far as how branding appears in films, where, say, you get these moments where some Audi cars are shown with their Audi logo in center frame, and then later on you see one of the Audi cars, stop just in time so it safely brakes before ramming into Ironmonger, played by Jeff Bridges. And that's the sort of thing where a marketer will say, this is a thing that we want in order to indicate. So there is, to some degree, floating in your subconscious then this idea that Audi cars stop safely in time. And that is something which marketers will spend lots of money to put into your cultural content.
That's interesting to me because it does feel I'm not saying not. It's obviously like, yes, like what you're saying is true. That is how marketers feel. But when it is put so simply and broadly like that, it does feel like, does that really work? But it must, because the money that is spent on these kind of branding is immense. So.
Yeah, well, it's a microcosm of something that film is very, very good at doing, where film is not particularly good at changing your mind and convincing you, but it is really, really good at reinforcing your current worldview, as well as making certain things feel warm and fuzzy and familiar. So it's like, voting is good, and you see, hey, it's good to be that one person that makes a difference. It's good to believe what is right. It's good to have a safe car from Audi. It's good to feel like you're a man of action who's sustained on the go by eating Burger King.
That's actually, sorry, but as like a brief, it's also interesting the fact that not only is Tony Stark like very manly when he's like smashing things, he also does, this is like him building something and like doing like very like advanced science and doing it in such an ad hoc kind of way compared to like how we would consider science in the real world, where it's like something that you have to be very slow and very yeah.
And manufacturing is hard and complex, but hey, I mean that's fine, because like that ties into like there's this visceral truth to the way that he assembles his science, as well as this certain reality that you can, to a certain degree, improvise. So, I just want to say that watching Jeff Bridges in this film this time, all I could think of was one Paul Hunterhurst Helmsley Levesque. Because Paul Levesque has shaved his head yet grown this bushy beard, and so they look so much the same person. I ask one if he want an ice cream cone, they both say yes.
And they both have very similar personalities.
Yes, that's the thing. They're both playing that slimy guy, that second in command, who's just insists that everything's under control so long as you leave it all to him. And he's not at all going to twist that knife in your back.
Yeah, Jeff Bridges is pretty fun in this film, for most of it anyway. Like, he has like this, I mean, it's Jeff Bridges, right? Like, he has this kind of like naturalness to him, and I really liked how just like friendly and genteel he is for like 90% of the film until like the villain
there's these
turn.
shades of the dude, even when he's being this businessman for life.
Yeah. And I think that makes his turn even better, where it's just like he was able to put on this front of being so friendly and like casual for so long that when like he does do his turn, it does work pretty well.
Yeah, like the phone call that he has with Tony Stark right before he knows that the hit has been planted on. He's just lying in bed naked with a drink next to him.
He has a lot of stuff like that, like when he's just he's that kind of very cold villain where like when he's really betraying Tony very directly, like when he uses the paralyzer thing, the sonic paralyzer, and he's just like, it's a shame that you had to involve Miss Pepper Potts in this. I would have rather her live. Like that kind of just like, he's not like outwardly, he's not going to shout too much. At least this is unfortunate that he kind of turns into a shouty villain at the end, because he's at his best when he's just like being like, has this affableness to him, but a drop of the hat, he will absolutely just murder you.
Yeah, that mob style where you just got the arm on the shoulder and saying like, I am going to murder you. And it's best achieved when at the party that Tony Stark spontaneously appears at, and the big reveals that Jeff Bridges is selling weapons to insurgents in the Middle East. And I mean, like, what American would do that? I mean, like, you wouldn't expect, say, the American military to be selling missiles to Iran 2 years after the hostage crisis or anything. That would be silly. And as Tony confronts Jeff Bridges just outside the building, and just straight up in public has that shoulder around him and says, yeah, I do this, and you're not going to do anything about it. And it's wonderful. But then, yeah, we got to get to the third act. This film, I almost feel there's an inverse problem with these two films, where this film has a really good first and second act, where it's just like the first act just establishes all these ideas, the second act further explores them, and then just has this joy of seeing something being developed and constructed before your eyes. So then the third act just needs to kind of wrap things up so we can roll credits, and this film doesn't go for 50 hours of watching Tony Stark say funny things. And it's mostly okay, but this is where I get to, like, this isn't an action film. And so having an action-oriented climax is really what hurts it. Because it's not about, hey, Iron Man is doing things and now he's got to use might to show that he's right. And I think this is a part of the criticism of Iron Man. Because, I mean, this film was very uncomfortable. On some level, this film was quite uncomfortable for me to watch because it's still very much glorifying the US military and is very much about this form of interventionism and force that doesn't really work and leans into myths which enable a lot of the brutality that the US has been able to do over many decades. But that's all being discussed by better people in better context than I can do off the cuff here at nearly midnight. But so the Jeff Bridges thing, like, this is a film where really a situation where Tony is able to outwit Jeff Bridges in the context of business and politics and ideals is the sort of climax that really works and that you really want to see, rather than Iron Man fought the bigger evil Iron Man and made it go boom. And this is really, really accentuated by how as soon as Jeff Bridges has his Iron Man but evil but bigger suit, and he starts putting on this altered in post-production cartoon Monster Man voice, as he suddenly just starts yelling about how evil and strong and powerful he is and threatens families with children. And it comes off as incredibly gauche and doesn't really work. What does work is the very end of it, where Iron Man uses his wits and his experience and knowledge at the limitations of the tech at this point to get Jeff Bridges frozen. That bit's good, because he's used his wits to outsmart the other guy, but it would have been that much more satisfying if they were doing it in where the actual battle was taking place, which is in ideas and business.
It's also a good example of setup and payoff, which this movie does pretty well. Like both with the in this case with the icing problem, where like when Iron Man is first building his suit, he goes too high up in the air, and he freezes up, falls to the ground, and he comes again into the at the end of the final battle, and it happens again. So it's like nice little pieces like that.
Yep, like that's just good bog standard writing, and that's That's the core of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, is that a lot of it is just well-constructed, bog-standard, doing the things that Hollywood's been doing for decades because it works.
I do, yeah. I feel like the only reason why I hesitate to talk about the third act too much is just because I really wish I could come up with something like other than just like criticizing it, because I feel like it is the weakest part of the film, and you've been able to pretty accurately describe why. I just wish that I could come up with some alternative or something, because I know there definitely would be some, but I just can't quite.
Well, the thing that you liked about it, and I think that we both like about it, is that it is fairly short. It's a very short, just, oh no, we've got to fight the big thing, and then the fight's done. It's not dragged out. They don't go from the city to the outer area, to back to the city, to around the big blue laser explosion. This is the first film. It is worth noting that the first MCU film does have a big blue laser going up in the sky, as Tony Stark blows up the reactor to finally take down Jeff Bridges. I lost my thought halfway through that.
That's okay. Yeah, we're just like trying to figure out what would be a better way of.
Oh yeah, the point is that it's quick.
Yeah,
it's quick, so it's like, hey, you have this one fight, and they do some things. Tony Stark outwits him, gets Pepper Potts to collaborate with him. Even if he doesn't use any sort of decent means to convince her he'll be okay, he just shouts at her until she does it, which is a bit shitty. But then it's done, and hooray, now we can wrap things up and be excited about more as he drops that amazing hook.
It really, yeah, that hook is really good. Like where he just says straight out that he's Iron Man, and it's just a great way to end the film. I also think that this a question could be asked about thinking about like better ways of going about this. Like it's the idea of like all these seeds have been planted in the first few acts, and these ideas of like what can Tony do to redeem himself, and like the skewed curvy path that he's on, and you know whether he's doing the right thing or not, and even the stuff about like intervention and accountability, and accountability is talked about even a little bit. And I find that
very briefly.
Yeah, and I find so interesting about it is that for Tony, he talks about accountability and the fact that that there hasn't been any. And now he's going to change that. Well, but in doing that, he kind of, in some way, just takes everything upon himself and says, now...
He doesn't believe in a third party passing through the veil of ignorance and assessing what is just based on ethics and morals and law. It's just, he entirely believes that he's... It's this moment where, like, this should be framed as a failing of him, that there's so much hubris going on here that he believes that he is judge, jury, and executioner. And that his solution to war isn't that we need to eliminate war. His solution is exactly the same as it was before with the missiles that he was selling, where he stated there that the path to peace isn't no weapons, instead just have a weapon that only needs to be used once. And he's just switched the nature of that weapon he wants to use once. His solution is no longer have missiles destroy everything indiscriminately. It's just, I will go in there as the missile and hit all the right targets with my computers.
And I think the question there is, especially we have all these films and we have this arc that Tony goes on throughout a lot of them. Yeah, I think the question is it to the detriment of this film that it doesn't really go further into that?
I think the issue isn't so much like you don't necessarily need discussions on this concept, but you could frame it as not being a wise and just move. But the film frames it as a moment of heroic triumph for Tony, when he just intervenes in the middle of not Afghanistan. They're somewhat vague about where he is. But like it's clearly Afghanistan. Like he just he just straight up just moves in, operating as an entirely sole operator, and just executes a bunch of people.
And I think, especially because Marvel have been really well praised for their planning, I'm not going to be too harsh on them, especially because they did end up talking about this stuff a little bit at least. Into Iron Man 2, where they have a big discussion on what can Tony Stark do in these conflicts. Like we see the US military and government trying to wrest control of his Iron Man suit away. Then of course we have Civil War, where we have a lot of discussion on what they can and can do by themselves. So it just depends on like whether you would consider a detriment to this film, in whether you would consider it to be, do you see this as step one of his arc, or do you want to have things wrapped
My
up
concern
more
is entirely
neatly?
just a framing thing, because
Okay.
although we are meant to empathize with the protagonist as the central focus of our emotive connection to the text, you can still have your framing undercut the things that they're doing to remind you that they're not necessarily making the right decisions. And the film doesn't do that. It just is completely on his side in he kills the bad guys. And
Yeah,
this is where a lot of big criticisms of superhero movies from this point onwards, both this and post Christopher Nolan as well, where there's this form of vigilante justice which is utterly irrespective of the law, yet acts like it is part of the law.
And I would love to see more superhero films discussing that kind
More-
of stuff later.
I'm just going to put that as a pin quote right there. Just, I would like to see more superhero movies, my friend Matt.
Sure, but yeah, I quite enjoyed watching this again. For the most part, I think it worked. It worked pretty well for the most part, despite having a few little issues.
Yeah, like, ideology aside, it is a film that really pulls you in and makes you excited to see more. Which really, like, Black Panther achieves that quite well as well, I think. Just from memory off the top of my head here. And I said before that, like, this film has two good acts and one which is a bit weak. And The Incredible Hulk, which is a bit of a weird one since there was co-production by Universal Studios and some weird finagling around with rights and production that leads to it being very wonky as far as what is canon in this film and which actors are canon. But where Iron Man had two good acts and one bad one, I feel that there is one good act and two terrible ones with The Incredible Hulk. I quite like the first act to this film. The opening credits are iffy. I think I'll let you get into those. In fact, just go now. Just tell us about the opening credits.
Oh wow. It basically, okay, so in watching The Incredible Hulk, it starts off with an opening credits that kind of work in like a weird visual montage kind of way, just trying to describe how, purely in visual form, Banner's transformation into the Hulk and like his general origin story is essentially shown in its entirety in this credit scene, in the opening credit scene. And it's just how to describe in words why something is visually bad. It just seemed very cheap and very. It just wasn't a very elegant way to me of like explaining a story, explaining the Banner origin story, and it just looked dumb and
I think
childish.
the problems to me are the angles and the palette used. Like, there's this weird washed out sickliness to it all. And the other thing is the shot of Bruce Banner, played by Edward Norton, sitting in the chair about to have the gamma rays blasted onto him, and he smiles and winks at the camera. And I think that's what really hurts it as well, that it's playing up like this facet of Bruce Banner as being this coy, wisecracking guy, which does not appear for the rest of the film. I wrote a blog review of Fate Stay Night, Heaven's Feel Part 1, the movie, at the end of 2017 when I saw it, where I made a bunch of MCU comparisons with that there. And I was thinking of the Hulk opening credits when I saw that film's opening credits, which do a very similar thing, though I feel it handles the visual component better as far as, here's the Cliff Note stuff that you already know. It's like, man get hit with radiation, man become good green man, Hulk want to be left alone, but world hate Hulk. But it's just not very good looking while doing it. It's ugly and unappealing at a point where you need as much sympathy for Hulk as you can. And I think that past that point, the first act actually achieves that quite well, of establishing, here's this guy who's down in his luck, trying to do the right thing, trying to look out for the people around him while he's in hiding in Brazil. And then ultimately, the American military just moves in on a sovereign state without any care, which is not commented on at all, which is 100% accurate to reality. And they smash up the place, and we get the best looking chase scene and action scene in the film, where you just get this well shot, fairly well edited, so you always know where everyone is and what they're doing. Chase scene through, some slums in Brazil. You get some creative use of space and trickery as far as like where holes and hazards and gaps between buildings are to trick people and things. That's quite tense and exciting, and I quite like it.
Yeah, I ended up being very disappointed in the film just because that first act just like really raised my expectations. Like, well, maybe I didn't realize, maybe I just remembered this film worse than it was, and that's kind of what the first act does, because it really is quite just fun and engaging. Like it, despite that opening credits, just him in Brazil just doing his own thing, and it was just so visually interesting watching him like jumping across rooftops and stuff like that, just like trying to escape. Like everything before the Hulk actually shows up is actually pretty decent.
Yeah, there's this recurring motif of green, because the Hulk, green. Hulk is green, where you just get green popping up in all these different contexts. So it'll be like the soda factory he's working in manufactures a green-colored soda. There's green-painted buildings around where he lives. The mattress he sleeps on has green stripes. And there's green used for both, because green is usually a signifier in lighting for unnatural, because green lighting is an unnatural-looking thing and tends to signify things like radiation and corruption, whereas there's shades of green which tend to be more associated with earth tones and nature. And the film plays around with both those sorts of greens, so there is this sense of this inescapable green, like the Hulk, even though you don't see the Hulk until the very end of the first act, there is this sense that everywhere Bruce Banner's going, the Hulk is always with him and lurking somewhere. And sometimes it's framed as being this unnatural, scary thing, and sometimes it's framed as this natural thing, this force of nature, which, of course, the Hulk as a manifestation of id can be read. Works, and it's like, that's neat. It's not subtle. None of the first act is subtle, but there is at least a visceral, emotional engagement here. It's like you feel bad for him and you want to see him do well, and it's sad that the American military won't stop chasing him to turn him into their super soldier experiment.
Yeah, the movie just kind of is working in that first act. Like, you understand what's going on, you understand where it's going, you understand where your main character is from and what he's trying to do, and you kind of empathize with what's going on with him. So
there's the sense of like he wants to get home, but he can't because of this thing, and so you'd think from there that like that'll be the moment at the end of the film is his final homecoming, and then if you want to go full Joseph Campbell's Hero of 1,000 Faces, and then discovering that home is not what it once was, and he has changed and must leave. And that would be fine, but the start of the second act is him immediately arriving home. And that's when things start to go off the rails.
Yeah, that's when you get the feeling that the movie just wasn't really... This is such a simple thing to say, but like it feels almost like a rough cut, like a rough draft, like if someone just had all these ideas of like what a Hulk film could be, but then just sort of like couldn't.
Oh, this really feels like a first draft that was struggling to hit 96 pages minimum, just to be done and be submitted.
Which is a shame, because they seem to have put a fair amount of effort into the first half, the first act, first 20-30 minutes. But as soon as you say, as soon as he gets home, the movie just sort of. It just stops working. Like, you lose... It seems to meander. Nothing it tries seems to land. And I mean, like, nothing. Like, because it tries a lot of different things. It's got, like... There's the drama of it that doesn't seem to be working too well. There's a romance between him and Elizabeth Ross, the Doctor, played by Liv Tyler.
It starts to go when he arrives home, and then you have this moment of unrequited love where it's, hey, I'd like to be with my old life, but I can't go back to that. But then he does, because she finds him, and then they just hang out, and there's no chemistry between them. They try to have these romantic comedy moments where there's these little quips together, and none of them land at all, and they just mill around on the run. But it's not like being on the run is the point. You're gonna do something like, say, Thelma and Louise or something, or it's a transition as they move into finding what their goals are. No, they just mill around until they get to New York to find a guy who's maybe got a cure for the Hulk, and that's not very well explored either, so it's just all my ideas are conveyed in a single monologue about the potential power of the Hulk.
Yeah, it's fun. It's interesting that that first act was so clear and concise about what was going on and what you should be feeling, and then it just loses that completely. Like you don't have a clear sense of what Banner is trying to do, really. Like yes, there is Mr. Blue, but we don't know much about him. We don't really know where he is. We don't even they don't even really talk too much about where he is and how to get there.
It's a mystery that you then have this journey to solve, and you could frame this as like, well, this is where it's like, what do you do with the Hulk when Hulk is the main character? Because Hulk is a tremendous supporting character. The Avengers movies demonstrate that pretty well, where you can play him for comedy beats, or you can play him as this extra moment of sympathy, where it's, hey, you got this crew of people who are well-rounded, and then there's this one guy who's pure pain and lashing out, and we really want him to hurt less, and it's kind of hard to achieve that. Or you go like Thor Ragnarok, where he's this quite deep character by that point, but when Hulk's the lead, it's what do you do? And I feel like you've got to either use the Hulk to have a discussion about masculinity being used to, like, have the Hulk be to a certain degree the embodiment of the human id, if we're going to go all Freud on this, and this sense of like this suppressed rage and violence that breaks out, and like finding ways to be more healthy in how we engage with our emotions, and from there, the Hulk then becomes this managed thing, and can become a strength rather than a weakness of Banner. And then from there, you can then write the Hulk as being this form of righteous fury, where it's, hey, he's this representation of all the frustrations we're feeling at systemic problems, and now he's going to be able to do something about it to some degree. But the film doesn't do either of those things with the Hulk.
Doesn't really do anything with him, really.
Yeah. So it's just Hulk angry, but maybe Hulk good inside? So now all you can do with that is, much like how Iron Man then had to fight Jeff Bridges as the bigger, more evil Iron Man, where it's like, having an evil Iron Man was fine, particularly in the form of outside their suits, because it's just two sides of this same coin of war profiteering. But here we have now Bruce Banner not want to fight, but Soldier Man with gamma rays does want to fight. Now Hulk must stop eviler Hulk, who looks like Doomsday, who want to fight and has spikes in arms.
Yeah, in Iron Man 1, we had a villain that worked for 90% of the film and then maybe suffered a little bit at the end. In this movie, we have a villain that works none of the time. Like, just zero presence, zero... Like, his motivations are either at first vague, and then when they're a little bit more fleshed out, they're also just very uninteresting. And there's just nothing to him at all. And
he comes in and he doesn't really reflect which is the actual villain, which is like the American state, and its military complex is the villain. And yet by the end of the film, Hulk is saving the general who represents the military complex, just so he can fight this lone wolf evil Hulk.
You think they would have had like a storyline instead where this abomination, or hopefully you come up with a better name, but whatever, this twisted monster is like, you would play it more for sympathy, just like how you'd have sympathy for the Hulk. Like, this guy is told that, look, there's this dangerous creature called the Hulk around, so we need you to stop him. And so they just pump him full of drugs and something goes wrong. And
they push him into being a wretched, twisted creature, much like Hulk, but Hulk's been able to maintain that empathy, and that's what makes him successful. But also, you then feel sympathy for evil Hulk when it's defeated for being just as much a victim of state abuse. But it's not. It's just, he's compliant, and so the state's able to just frame him as a scapegoat. Yeah, you killed the real problem right there, Hulk. Don't mind me, General Ross, getting off scot-free.
Yeah, it just doesn't work. It's the wrong villain. Like General Ross should be the main villain of this film, even if he can't actually be the monster. I think in the comics he is the monster.
He could be the monster.
Yeah, he could have just pumped him full of drugs. I'm pretty sure Ross is the Red Hulk in the comics anyway. Mm-hmm. So yeah, like, nothing works in this film. The villain doesn't work. The romance doesn't work. The drama doesn't work. The action scenes don't look very good at all for most part. I'm not sure if there's any
like
exceptions.
we talked about how good the practical effects are in the first one, and it almost feels like there's a switch of director after the first act in the Hulk movie, because we talked before about like fairly good editing and use of location shoots, and then the first act culminates in this fight in the bottling factory that Bruce Banner was working in, where he then gets set off by both the local thugs as well as the military trying to attack him, and that's just too much for his stress, and now he's angry. And even when he's smashing the place up, it doesn't look particularly good, but there's the sense to go, okay, the CG isn't all that great, so we're going to use all the tricks that we've learned over the decades since Jaws to obscure the Hulk himself. So there's industrial steam that gets in the way, he's coated in shadows, he's behind large objects, and they just move the large physical prop. And that's what you're looking at rather than the CG Hulk in the background pushing it. Explosions, silhouetting him, all this stuff, so you're not really seeing this full body shot of the Hulk because it would look bad. And it's like, that's good, that's smart. You're leaving the full reveal of the Hulk for a later climactic moment, and you're also making sure that the movie still looks good. But then the next time you see the Hulk, it's just in broad daylight, fighting these awful CG helicopters. They have not aged well. All the explosions there are completely CG, and they look so fake.
And the whole situation also is just kind of basically that fight is in like a park. Like it's just
the lawn in front of a uni.
Yeah, it's like such a small place, and it just looks so bad. Like even discounting the CG, just the location itself is just so nothing, and it makes it just feel so cheap when the Hulk is supposed to be like this, like giant hulking monstrous figure that like can like if you're gonna have an action scene with him, like you probably should just go all out and have like him smashing things, but it's just such nothing. It's like a Jeep or two, this shitty CGI helicopter,
and the base idea for that scene isn't too bad if you really want to go full on of the state as the villain. Like the state's militarism is the true evil, because then especially since the scene establishes that there's like 3 military Hummers and that's it, but then just more stuff keeps appearing in jump cuts from just the offside of the frame. Suddenly extra Jeeps jump into view and helicopters and things. And you could actually really ramp that up. So it's like, here we have what is supposed to be this place of learning and benefit to society, and is getting stomped on by the military, which is just this endless flow from the largest military force in the world with the largest investments, just keeps pouring in and smashing up and destroying this place of learning, all to open fire on a victim of their own greed. That is something which you could make some really evocative imagery with, but the film doesn't want to. It's just, we've got this field we can fight the Green Man in.
And it's a real shame, because I think that would have fit really well with the MCU as a whole, especially considering if we're considering what kind of movies there are, the superhero movies where like individuals are trying to stand up and do what's right. So the idea of a failing state that most of these superheroes are from, that is not to be trusted anymore, and that the former source of authority, the states, is just no longer trustworthy. It could be
specifically it's like America is the bad guy is generally a thing I'm very fine with movies doing, and these movies don't.
Yeah,
for obvious reasons.
Yeah, it could have been very interesting, like this idea of like, and especially because it would have given Hulk as well, and even though it worked out for him in the end, the Hulk is a pretty decent character by now in the MCU, but it could have given him another little thing where he's like, yeah, you guys don't realize, a lot of you superheroes, just how shitty things can be, and you haven't been hunted like I have been by the same people that you often work with. It could have been an interesting dynamic, I think, going forward.
And it wasn't. Do you have anything else you'd like to say today? I'm just about done. Mentally. This taping wound up pretty late.
Yeah, it was very disappointing. Nothing lands in the film after the first act. Like, literally nothing. And I find it interesting, the fact that it tried so many different things, and each one would fail in turn. It's funny, because we were just talking about the scene in the park where the General Ross would throw one thing after another at the Hulk, and it would fail. It'd be like, okay, try this, fails, try this, fails. Because it's almost like the movie in itself. You'd be like, try some romance, just doesn't work. Try some drama, doesn't work. Try this new villain, doesn't work. Like, it's just this constant failure.
Yeah, now we've run out of ideas. We've got this vague sequel hook that will maybe one day be followed up on, but probably won't because no one really wants to think about the Incredible Hulk.
Yeah, I guess the last...
Holy cow, I had forgotten it was released the month after Iron Man 1.
I knew it was the same year. I didn't know it was that soon, though.
Yeah, I thought it was like October. No, it's May 2nd for Iron Man and June 13th for the Incredible Hulk. Wow.
That really is interesting. And maybe that's one of the reasons why it was forgotten so quickly, that it was just in the shadow of the movie that everyone likes.
Yeah.
And it was just like, well...
Iron Man was still probably running in cinemas locally at that point.
And when did Iron Man 2 come out? Just a couple
Iron
years
Man
later?
is May 7th, 2010.
2010.
Yeah, you get this weird... Then suddenly there's this 2-year gap where it's just... And I think that's why it feels like there's this weird condensed time after Iron Man 1. Where it's like, oh, was there lots of stuff? No, it's just Iron Man 2. And then, whoa, here's all these other movies suddenly. And it's, because there's this 2-year gap, and then they start establishing more of the formula that we are accustomed to of, 3 Marvel movies a year.
And that is probably one of the more interesting things about Incredible Hulk, just the fact that it is this weird misstep. And even though there are other films I personally didn't enjoy very much in the MCU, like Thor.
We'll be getting to Thor next week.
But even amongst those, even amongst the other MCU films that maybe I didn't enjoy so much, it does feel like extra not great, if that makes sense. It's like this, it's a black sheep even in a series. It does have a few movies that don't quite work so well.
Yeah. It's the one that most immediately sticks to mind as a bad movie.
And it's just so interesting that it was able to have this giant franchise was able to survive something like this, and not just survive it, but it wasn't even a blow. It didn't even matter.
Yeah, I think a big part of their success, and I think this will be a good point to end on tonight, is that Iron Man 1 has this post-credits scene where Tony Stark meets Samuel L. Jackson playing Nick Fury, a man with an eye patch who says, "I run S.H.I.E.L.D., this secret organization." I mean, we can get into S.H.I.E.L.D. and just how it frames a facet of the American state as being an international organization, and the certain American hubris that is inherent there. But it's like people weren't accustomed to seeing the stingers, and so some people saw it, some people didn't. But the Incredible Hulk is really remembered because it places the stinger before the credits. The film ends on this final moment of Bruce Banner getting some control over the Hulk, which is fine. But then it immediately then goes to the stinger of Tony Stark talking to General Ross to say, hey, the Avengers are coming. And I think it's really important that they did that there, because that's all anyone really remembered from the Hulk, is not so much, hey, here's this bad movie, but hey, the Avengers are coming. We're going to see more superhero movies coming together, and they're going to do stuff. That's exciting. That's never really happened before. Can't wait to see what happens there. And that's really the hook. I remember when I got to Iron Man 2, and we'll probably talk about this more next week, that I saw it with people who were mostly interested for more information about what's Nick Fury and the Avengers up to. Where is this going? What are they going to do with these Avengers that they've dropped? They were as much as what's Tony Stark doing next.
And it's so exciting that I'm excited to watch it again, so it shows how good of a hook it actually is. Even I'm excited even though I've already watched it, I'm interested to see it again.
So we'll leave you there on that hook and talk to you next week when we watch Iron Man 2 and Thor.
Bye. Goodbye.